I've chosen these readings and I'm sidestepping away from Epiphany a little bit today. Well, I could give the excuse that the wise ones haven't arrived at the stable yet. But really, I'm stepping away because I'd like to honour the fact that this is my last service with you as your bridge pastor. And I'd like to share a little bit about what this experience has been like for me. I thought that this was going to be a small part-time job for 2 or 3 months, but actually it's been a deeply transformative journey for me as we've entered into the unknown together as a congregation with you all and finding ways to be real and intimate online during COVID with no end in sight for season after season after season. It's so bizarre to me that I said yes to this, and I'm so incredibly grateful that I opened my heart to this, to you all, and to this bold step. And one of the ways that I've been able to do this is every week, usually, especially on a Saturday night, by praying very sincerely, please, please, God, tell me what to say. Tell me what to say. And we have an idea about ourselves. And one of my erroneous ideas is that I am not a church minister, that my faith is too weird and mystical and outside of religion for it to be a good fit for a congregation. And you all have taught me that that really is an erroneous idea. It underestimates everybody, underestimates me, underestimates you, and it underestimates God too in this process. The logical thinking part of us, which was the barrier for me here, is really good at observing reality and making decisions and managing what already exists. But that logical, sensible part of us doesn't always remember to factor in the unseen, and grace and miracles and our future selves don't really get factored into the equation. Now, there's something I know about God, and I use that word God as shorthand because really there's no word that you can describe this thing that is beyond description. And the thing that I know is that God is like a slippery fish. The moment you think you've got your hands on it, it gets away from you and goes off somewhere else. And this makes sense if you think about God as an unfolding or a pouring out of itself rather than a being. Now, the fact that I became bridge pastor here is so incredibly unlikely. Let me tell you the story. So it started with 1 or 2 dinners back in Kitsap with Sophie was there and sat round the table. And I remember one time we were sitting round her friend's table and Mark, your pastor, had just left. And she said, "Do you preach? Are you interested in coming and preaching? Because we don't have a pastor." So in Advent of 2019, I came and preached for you all. And I also got to meet Erin, your first bridge pastor, a lovely woman. I remember meeting the choir. I remember talking with Marilyn about playing the piano in church and improvisation. I remember having all these amazing conversations with people. And I noticed the way that you did communion. It was led by the people. I'd never seen that before. I felt this strong thirst for social justice and an awareness of the fact that you were on Suquamish land, that the tribe was very present in your thinking. Now, this all made sense because I'd encountered your congregation before through Sophie and Laura at Pride. They'd always come to Pride, they'd have a table, they were so supportive, really walking the talk of inclusion and honouring diversity. But when I first came and shared a sermon, it was about Mary's yes. And I think I also talked about Steiner's 12 holy nights and the angels circling the globe. When I gave my sermons to you all, I felt really heard. It was like you didn't just hear my message, you also heard my faith. And I got the impression that, wow, this is a congregation that really has a great alignment for my spiritual tradition which is informed by Christianity, but more than that. And I remember at the end, a bunch of people came up and said, we need a new pastor. We need a hint, hint. There was maybe 3 people. I remember saying, well, I've just decided to move to Vermont. So 6 months later, I did move to Vermont, and we fast forward 6 months in time, and I got some emails from Laura asking me if I would come and be the bridge pastor because Erin had a life on hold that she needed to get back to. And she asked me to come and be your online bridge pastor for a couple of months until you got a settled pastor. Now, we all know that that couple of months turned into a year and a half. Now, this isn't something that I would consider, but I'd met Laura often enough to trust her and to deeply listen to her. And she genuinely thought this was a good fit. And this is where discernment began to come in, because my ideas about myself would be like, no, this is not what I do in the world. But Laura kind of stirred up a spacious feeling in me, a quiet that was just too quiet. Like God was pausing and waiting for me to notice something, that all these pieces were lined up. And everything was lined up. I was desperately in need of income, having just arrived in Vermont with no job. And you all had nobody to lead worship. And this, for me, has seemed really terrible situation for any church to be in during COVID. And I knew all about online worship. That's this area of speciality that I had trained in. But even with all these things lined up, I still was like, oh, no, oh, I'm not so sure about this. And I felt very underconfident. And that first, Kelly and Jane and Sophie and Laura really had to persuade me that I had the skills needed to be able to show up in a way that was helpful for you all. And I'm so grateful that they boosted my confidence. And then I started to be your bridge pastor. And Doug, you sent me a covenant letter. I'd never been sent a covenant letter before. I'd only ever been given job contracts. And it was reading the language of that I suddenly realized with hindsight that God's fingerprints were all over this document. And here's me dragging my heels the whole way. And in reflecting on this, I thought, oh, I should share about that, because often when I talk about the sacred voice, the still small voice, it seems to have authority, but that authority only, for me, often comes in with hindsight, after I'm already showing up on the Zoom, after I've already said yes to this task that I am unsure of or frightened of, and in this case, both. And I really wanted to honor the fact that we don't always in the church talk about how fragile that voice can speak to us, or how confused it can be. I think when there's no ego or fear involved, we're able to answer our longings and our call. But the moment that we're not sure about our worth, or we're frightened of something, our thoughts get very, very noisy, and they cover over our deep wisdom. So it was really beautiful to find myself, by accident, as your bridge pastor, in a place that I realized was a great fit for me, where the work that I was doing to trying to dismantle white supremacy from Christianity was the work that you were doing, that there were many aspects that we were exploring together in our faiths. It was a beautiful fit, and I'm so grateful for it. No, I'm trying to keep the sermon section today quite short, so I'm going to bring towards a summary around that discernment. When I went to my interfaith seminary, they very rarely told us what to do. They gave us a lot of avenues for growth and opportunities for deeper learning, but they did not direct us, except for in one very specific area. They said, you must do your spiritual practice. You must. It is the thing that allows you to have presence. And every single time we gathered, they would ask us about our spiritual practice, what was unfolding, how difficult it was, whether we were trying new things. And I think that this aligns with a sacred truth that's in the readings today, which is if we pause to create the stillness for the deeper wisdom to bubble up or to be received, then we can co-create with it. Then we can shift our actions. Then the thinking self that has this idea about this world can be expanded and more grace can flow through us. But it takes the pause, and it takes a lifetime of spiritual practice actually to really be able to do that inner reflective work, to notice what is a sacred longing and what is a neurosis or just a fleeting thought. Is this thought coming from inside me, outside? What is my mental health like on this day? There's so many factors that each of us have to take in, but the stillness and the prayer really are the building blocks that allow us to hear a call and to explore, to open our heart. And it starts with listening. Rumi says, silence is the language of God, and it speaks to us about the secrets of the universe. So it starts with the listening, which makes us aware of something, allows us to attend to silent longings, or awakening the heart to inspiration. I've got a quote from Richard Rohr here that really I found very helpful. So I often talk about co-creating with the sacred, and even though I use the word Lord a lot, it's funny. The two kind of are different parts of me. Here's the phrase, and then I'll try and pull out the bit that is speaking to me. Richard Rohr says, all authentic knowledge of God is participatory. Divine knowing, some would call it spiritual intuition, is actually an allowing of someone else to know in us, through us, for us, and even as us. It demands what I like to call an identity transplant. It's I live no longer, not I, as dear Paul would put it in Galatians. And I think this is true, that we take communion, we do our prayer work to expand the vessel of who we are, to break the confines of our existing thinking so that new ideas can come in. That's where art and all sorts of things that are not words can be really helpful. And in our tradition, in the Christian tradition, we believe in this Christ consciousness, this body of the collective humanity that was seeded in us right at the beginning of this world, that we're moving towards, part of our unitive identity that exists within our individual identity. That's how I would say it. And I've got one last little clip for us. This is Mirabai Star talking a little bit about this prayer of quiet and this outpouring that accompanies it.
Teresa of Avila, she talks about different phases of contemplative prayer, and the one that moves me most is what Teresa calls the prayer of quiet. And this is a state of grace, where when we engage in contemplative prayer or contemplative practice of any kind, what in the Eastern traditions is called meditation, and in the Judeo-Christian traditions is more contemplation, when we do that kind of formless practice of turning inward and resting in what is, we do make ourselves available and may experience the grace of the prayer of quiet, where this sweet stillness comes and descends in our souls, and we drop into this we're almost unable to move for the sweetness of that contemplative space, which again, all the mystics consider to be a place of grace.
Silence or deep listening can open us to receive God's grace and divine wisdom. So the use of silence is a tool here to embrace the unknowing. And when you're lucky, into that spaciousness, guidance and divine authority bubbles up. And to be honest, this is what has fueled my sermons these past few seasons. And I'm astonished by the things that we have explored, the wisdom that's come up. This is sermon number 60 that we're on today. I thought I had 6 sermons in me. And I have to say, it's been amazing, but it's time for me to rest now.